The parable of the Good Samaritan recorded in Luke's Gospel stands as one of the most enduring and powerful stories in Western literature. Far more than a simple moral tale about helping others, this narrative operates on multiple layers of meaning that would have been immediately apparent to its original audience but may be less obvious to modern readers. To fully appreciate the revolutionary nature of this parable, we must understand the complex social, religious, and economic dynamics at play in first-century Palestine. The historical context of Jewish-Samaritan relations. The relationship between Jews and Samaritans in Jesus' time was marked by centuries of mutual hostility and religious antagonism. This animosity had deep historical roots dating back to the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BCE. When the Assyrians deported much of the Jewish population, they brought in foreign settlers who intermarried with the remaining Jews, creating what became known as the Samaritan people. From the Jewish perspective, Samaritans were not merely foreigners, but religious heretics who had corrupted the pure worship of Yahweh. The Samaritans maintained their own version of the Torah, worshipped at Mount Gerizim rather than Jerusalem, and claimed to be the true inheritors of Israel's covenant with God. This religious schism created a profound social divide that went far beyond theological disagreement. The Samaritans were not considered equals to the Jews in any sense. They were viewed as racially impure, religiously corrupt, and socially inferior. Orthodox Jews would go to great lengths to avoid contact with Samaritans, often taking longer routes when traveling to avoid passing through Samaritan territory. The depth of this prejudice is captured in John's Gospel, where the author notes with apparent surprise that Jesus would even speak to a Samaritan woman, explaining that Jews do not associate with Samaritans. This context is crucial for understanding the shocking nature of Jesus' parable. When he chose a Samaritan as the hero of his story, he was not merely selecting a random foreigner or outsider. He was deliberately choosing someone from a group that his Jewish audience regarded as fundamentally inferior, religiously corrupt, and socially unacceptable. The economic dimension of compassion. While the parable's challenge to ethnic and religious prejudice is often emphasized, less attention is typically paid to its economic implications. A careful reading of the text reveals that the Samaritan must have been a person of considerable wealth and social standing. The injured man had been stripped of his clothing, beaten, and left half dead by robbers on the dangerous road from Jerusalem to Jericho. The Samaritan's response was not merely to offer immediate first aid, but to provide comprehensive care that required significant financial resources. He treated the man's wounds with oil and wine, expensive commodities in the ancient world. Oil was used as a healing balm, while wine served as an antiseptic, both representing costly medical supplies. More significantly, the Samaritan transported the injured man to an inn and paid for his accommodation and care. In the ancient world, inns were not charitable institutions but commercial enterprises. The Samaritan gave the innkeeper 2 denarii, equivalent to 2 days' wages for a common laborer, as an advance payment for the man's care. Perhaps most remarkably, he promised to return and pay any additional expenses that might accrue during the man's recovery. This open-ended financial commitment suggests that the Samaritan possessed not only liquid assets but confidence in his ability to cover potentially substantial medical and hospitalization costs. In an era without insurance or social safety nets, caring for a seriously injured stranger represented a major financial undertaking that only someone of considerable means could reasonably promise. The revolutionary nature of the narrative. By making his hero both a despised Samaritan and a wealthy individual, Jesus created a parable that challenged his audience on multiple levels. The story subverted expectations about both ethnic superiority and economic responsibility. The Jewish religious leaders in the story, the priest and the Levite, represent not only religious authority, but also social respectability. We should also bear in mind that Jesus was not generally on good terms with the elders of the temple. I refer to the story of Jesus turning over the money changers' tables. These money changers obviously had good businesses going on in the temple, and no doubt the temple authorities made a nice little earner by allowing them to set up their tables. It would seem that Jesus specifically mentions the priest and the Levite in this narrative to have a dig at them. Their failure to help the injured man would have been shocking to Jesus' audience, who expected religious leaders to exemplify moral behavior. Yet these representatives of Jewish religious orthodoxy literally crossed to the other side of the road to avoid involvement with the victim's suffering. In contrast, the Samaritan, ethnically despised and religiously rejected by Jewish society, demonstrates the very compassion and moral responsibility that the religious leaders abdicated. This reversal of expectations served to challenge fundamental assumptions about who could be considered righteous and who could be counted as a true neighbor. The economic dimension adds another layer to this challenge. The Samaritan's wealth enables his compassion to take practical form. His financial resources allow him to move beyond mere sentiment to effective action. This raises uncomfortable questions about the relationship between economic privilege and moral responsibility that remain relevant today. Implications for modern understanding. The parable of the Good Samaritan continues to resonate because it addresses enduring human tendencies toward prejudice and moral selectivity. However, recognizing the Samaritan's likely wealth adds complexity to the story's moral teaching. On one hand, the Samaritan's financial resources enabled his extraordinary compassion. Without the means to pay for extended care, his assistance might have been limited to immediate first aid. His wealth became an instrument of mercy, allowing him to provide comprehensive help that probably saved the victim's life. On the other hand, the story raises questions about whether moral obligation correlates with financial ability. If the Samaritan's goodness was partly enabled by his wealth, what does this suggest about the moral expectations we place on those with fewer resources? Does the parable inadvertently create a standard of compassion that is accessible only to the affluent? Enduring relevance. The Good Samaritan remains one of history's most powerful illustrations of compassion transcending social barriers. By choosing a wealthy Samaritan as his protagonist, Jesus created a character who could not be dismissed as either powerless or conventional. The Samaritan's ethnic and religious otherness challenged prejudice, while his economic resources enabled effective action. This combination of social marginality and economic capability creates a complex moral exemplar who defies easy categorization. The Samaritan embodies both the outsider's perspective on suffering and the insider's ability to address it effectively. His story suggests that true compassion requires not only good intentions, but also the means and commitment to act decisively when confronted with another's need. In our contemporary context, where social divisions often intersect with economic inequalities, the parable of the Good Samaritan continues to offer both challenge and guidance. It reminds us that moral worth cannot be determined by social status, religious affiliation, or ethnic identity, while also highlighting the practical reality that effective compassion often requires significant resources and sustained commitment. The revolutionary power of this ancient story lies not just in its call to love our neighbors, but in its redefinition of who our neighbors might be and what loving them truly requires. I hope you've enjoyed this deeper look into this well-known story. Maybe you'd like to say something in the comments. By the way, I've also posted a short video of the original story from the Gospel of Luke, if you'd like to take a look at it.